Emmy winner Mark Isham is one of the composers behind the Hulu limited series Little Fires Everywhere. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby, here with Mark. And to start, just tell me about composing that main title music that we hear at the beginning of every episode. It's just so dramatic, and it just builds and builds to this real crescendo point. Tell me about that.
Well, this show is interesting because it was a collaboration with Isabella Summers, who is the Machine from Florence and the Machine. And we come from, we have some similarity in our backgrounds. We both spent a lot of time performing, but she is very entrenched in popular music and is very good at the hook and the build and the bombastic things like that. And I, of course, have a much more eclectic background. So when we came together to write this, we were determined to really collaborate and to sit in a room together and work out a style and a sound that neither one of us would have done on our own. But I think we were pretty successful at that. And the main title, I think, is a very good example. There's a lot of intricate string writing, which, you know, is part of my background, but there's a very pop sensibility to the whole thing at the same time, which was she brought to it. And then, of course, just fabulous drums and percussion, which she had a major part of influence on that. We knew this story had to be told in a big way, that it wanted to build, that it wanted to, you know, just pull you in. And we spent a lot of time just working that out and thrashing out the different ideas from our different backgrounds. And I think we came up with something that really does entice you and pull you into this, you know, really rather remarkable story.
Mm-hmm. When you talked about some of the instruments you used there, what was just the decision making behind just the types of instruments you wanted to use throughout the series?
Well, I think one of the things that led the way, of course, was that Izzy, the volatile teenage daughter, is a violinist, and a good violinist, and a rebellious young lady, and she's playing Alanis Morissette tunes on the violin and listening to, you know, punk rock, and so there was an element of that led the way, but that's what's great about the violin, is because it can be a modern, you know, punkish instrument, but it, of course, has a tremendously rich classical background as well. So we knew that strings were going to be a big part of this. The momentum of this show and the what Isa wanted to bring to it from her background just demanded that it be great drums, great drumming. We actually have real drums. It's not programmed. This is Vinnie Colaiuta, one of the great drummers of our time, is playing on this. And then just by sort of happenstance, you know, piano is sort of the go-to instrument you sort of start with when you're writing. Little Fires, we came across this sample called the burning piano, and we couldn't resist. And so there's a fair amount of this just intoxicating and strange and warped piano called the burning piano. And then we sort of filled in the gaps around those points.
Well, one of the things that I really love about this score is how it manages to sort of blend both a lightness and also a darkness at the same time. It actually, I don't know, it sort of reminds me of like a Philip Glass score for the Hours sort of thing. Just that sort of like, it reflects this idea of being trapped, I think, and then just reaching that breaking point eventually, just with how the music sort of rises and rises. Is that kind of the feeling you wanted to convey just on a theme level?
I think that's a pretty good description of it. I mean, a lot of what we base the score on are very, very simple ideas. And I think, again, this came from working with Isa, who just kept pointing out that, look, a great song, a great pop moment is a very simple idea. And it's just, you present it and you present it well, and there's just the right amount of repetition to make it just really, really work. And we tried to bring those elements to bear here. And just sort of plant these interesting, hopefully provocative, simple ideas musically, and then just in the way that a great pop song, you know, just sort of pulls you along, do that do that same thing. And of course, that's you mentioned Philip Glass. It's interesting to point out that, of course, that's one of the things that he brought to modern classical music. He brought this sense of repetition, the sense of the pop music's repetition of taking very simple ideas and building on them. So that is definitely a corollary to what we were doing here.
Mm-hmm. Well, the very last track on the soundtrack, the very last piece of score that we hear in the finale is called Build It Up. And it's just beautiful. And just hearing it alongside Pearl's poem, and it's this great melody, especially with the violin, I believe. Can you just talk about the work you put into such an important piece like that really has to help wrap up the whole series?
Well, there's an interesting story behind that. Ingrid Michaelson wrote a beautiful, beautiful song, Build It Up. Mm-hmm. And initially that was slated to be over that scene. And the more we worked with it, the more Liz, the showrunner, just said, the lyrics are so beautiful, but the poem is so important. I don't think the two can really give each other enough space for the impact of each one to occur if they're fighting for space. So what we tried was we took an instrumental version of Ingrid's song and built a score cue out of it for the poem. And then after the poem is wrapped up, we go to Ingrid's beautiful lyrics. So the instrument actually is a cello with strings. And so what I did was I went back and just tried to emulate what Ingrid's words basically try to communicate, and do is the best job I could at putting that in the hands of a great cellist. And we fortunately have a great cellist here in Los Angeles, and he did just a beautiful, beautiful job. So I think what's great about that moment, just structurally, is that it sets the bed for this song, because it basically is the song, a long introduction to the song, and then it pays off with these gorgeous lyrics that come in.
Mm-hmm. So when you're drumming up ideas for the score before you even see anything, and then later you watch, like the footage of the episode, did anything actually change just based on what you saw with the look of the show, what the actors were doing, anything like that?
We had an interesting path developing the sound of this show. It actually took a little longer than normal, and not just because it was Isa and I writing in with each other, which we'd never done before. That had its own trajectory, but we sorted that out reasonably quickly. I think within 2 or 3 weeks we had a vocabulary that we were really happy with together as a writing duo. We just ran into problems communicating with the show's producers and the showrunner as to what we wanted to present. There's something that happens in this business when a piece of music gets put into a show, and for the first time a showrunner feels that, oh my God, this show is really working because of that music, then a relationship called temporary music love can be established. And that happened here, and it sort of colored, in other words, it set some expectations in the producers' minds of, well, this is the only type of music that will help our show, when it really wasn't. And so we actually had to step back and score an entire episode and then just say, look, we're not going to send you individual cues. This isn't working. Give us a couple of weeks. And we went and we scored the entire pilot itself, and then we invited them to a darkened room and turned down the lights and played them the whole episode with music that they'd never heard before, that was all ours, and we won them over. And that's what it took in this particular case, just to really establish a brand new sound that nobody had temped in, that no picture editor thought this was the right choice, that the producers hadn't mulled about. We really just said, we're taking this on our own, and we're going to present to you what we feel is correct. And we won. That's the result. You hear the results of that.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Are there just any aspects of the score that maybe someone might not notice on a first watch, but that you took special care to include? Maybe some sort of repeating motif that, might be more noticeable after you point it out here, perhaps?
I don't know. There's definitely thematic unity across the whole show. I think the very first theme you hear as Reese is looking at her house and devastated, and the family is devastated, and it's basically the end of the show being previewed in the first opening scene. There's a motif that comes in there, very abstract and very simple, but that's becomes the motif, one of the three big motifs for the show. And it appears in a number of different ways. It appears in gospel form, it appears in hip hop form, it appears in all sorts of interesting forms. And that, I think you might have to watch the show a couple of times to really see that and hear that.
And doing a limited series where where it's going from beginning to end, what does that provide for you compared to something like an ongoing series or even a movie? Like, is there a difference there?
Well, I think, yes, there is. A limited series has the advantage that a movie has, is that you know where you're going, and you know what you can set the large stage and a structure so that you know that this theme that you're writing now is going to be the theme at the end of the show. And you can do that in a movie, obviously. In an ongoing, let's say, standard 22 episode television show, that's harder to do, because that last episode will not have been written when you're doing the pilot. In fact, the last 5 episodes will not even have been written. So you don't know what's going to happen to your characters necessarily. So it's much harder to predict and to get long-term forms to work in regular television. I did, for instance, Once Upon a Time for 7 years, and we were pretty lucky in that the showrunners and the writers would always call me up and say, you know what, Prince Charming, I think in about 6 or 7 episodes, Prince Charming is going to do this and this and this. So I'd prepare for that. So we had as much notice as we could probably have in that situation. But in a limited series, and in a movie, and you can really wrap up a really strong structural form for the score.
Well, looking at another series that you did the score for from this TV season, you also did the score for Godfather of Harlem. Very different kind of show.
Yeah.
What was that experience working on that show?
Well, that was very different. Obviously, I wrote that by myself, and I had a very different set of problems to solve. Here we had a period piece. So you had to be very specific to the culture and the time and the place. It's in Harlem. It's in the 60s. And there's a lot of source music from that time that the score wanted to be able to blend with and feel a part of. At the same time, Swizz Beatz is building a library of contemporary songs to interact with this music and to be a part of the show. So there was this elaborate construction of these ideas that you could start in a bar, for instance, with what would be the local music of that period and that place and that time. And then as you cut outside for a montage, it would morph into a contemporary song that Swizz would have produced. And given that rather bold and fantastic mission to do things like that, the score had to be able to do similar things. The score had to be able to hand off to a Swizz song or pick up something from a Swizz song. Or there were some times where I actually sampled some of the vocal parts out of a Swizz song and built that into the score. So we're tying very contemporary songwriting and hip-hop music into the period of the 60s in Harlem. And as Forrest Whitaker kept pointing out to me, he said, This is an epic story. This is a Godfather story. We need a touch of that large Hollywood epic scoring moments as well. So it was quite a puzzle, but it took some doing. But I think at the end of the day, I found a really nice balance, and I think it works really, really well.
Yeah. Well, you have had a pretty extensive career in the industry, working in TV and film. You were nominated for an Oscar for A River Runs Through It. You won an Emmy for Easy Streets. You were very recently nominated a couple of years ago for Once Upon a Time. Since we're Gold Derby and we focus on awards here, do you have any favorite just award show memories just from your career that you like to look back on?
Well, the one time I was invited to the Oscars, I must admit it was a pretty meaningful experience. I was sitting in a row with John Barry and Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams. Wow. And I was the kid. And I'll never forget that. And of course, none of us won. Alan Menken, I think, won.
Sure. Yeah.
The forest was traipsed off to the bar. But they're such elegant gentlemen, and it was just I felt so honored just to be there. That was probably my most my most favorite memory.
Mm. That's great. Yeah, all legends there, including Al Menken, of course. Yeah. Well, we'll see if we can get you another Emmy nomination here for Little Fires Everywhere. Mark, thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. And for those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more interviews just like this, and head to goldderby.com to start making your Emmy predictions.